Hey friends, today I've got a really special video for you. Normally we love to talk about gear and keep it fun and light, but today we're talking about something really quite serious, which is car seats and safety. Car seats are the one thing we sell that we're really passionate about because ultimately, in the event of an accident or something more tragic, it can save your child's life and protect your family. So we've brought the one and only Catherine Hutka here today. She is the president of the Child Passenger Safety Association of Canada. So she's the one. She knows all the information. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history, her history, how car seats have evolved, and then we're going to get into the details of a really important study that was just completed talking about car seat safety and the things to look out for. We're also going to do a couple-part series where we talk about other car seats, going through each type and showing how to install and what to look for. So be on the lookout for that later. But today we're going to talk all things car seat safety and this recent study commissioned with Cybex to talk about where the state of the industry is at, what to look for, and how to think about car seat safety. We really hope you enjoy this. Catherine, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I really appreciate you taking the time. Do you mind telling our friends out there just maybe a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why this is going to be such an important chat for them?
All right. So my name is Catherine Hutka, and I am currently the president of the Child Passenger Safety Association of Canada. And that's an organization with a focus on advocacy and training and education around the safe transportation of children in car seats and booster seats. And also in my day job, I am a health promotion specialist for child passenger safety for Child Safety Link, which is a children's injury prevention program at IWK Health, which is a large regional children's hospital in Atlanta, Canada.
Yeah. So how did you get into this in the first place? I'm just curious. Like, what brought you into this? Because that's like you're like the big show. So how does one become this?
My origin story is actually I had a big giant baby.
Okay.
I had a huge, big giant baby 18 years ago. He's 18 years now.
How huge? Friends got to know. They want to know.
He was 11 pounds, 2 ounces at birth. And he was 22 pounds at 4 months old. So he had outgrown the infant seat at that time, went to only 22 pounds rear facing, like that seat.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, we got to go to the larger convertible seat. And he was 27 pounds at 7 months old. And I'm like, where are we going with this? Like, are we going to, I was worried that he would outgrow all of the seats at that time that could be used rear facing before he was a year old. That's what I was worried about. We didn't get there. He stood up, he walked, and all of a sudden he was no longer a giant butterball baby, and he kind of like his weight evened out. Okay. But that was what I was worried about. At that time, we only had rear-facing car seats that went to 30 pounds, and so I was like, what am I going to do? This is the law. This is the recommendation, and that's what started it all. So I started doing some research, finding out what car seats I could use, finding out what was going to keep him safe as he grew as this big giant baby, and now he's a 6 foot tall man who's just started university this month. So, yeah.
So that's what brought you here.
That's what brought me here. That was
giants.
That's what the start of my journey was.
And what did that look like? So you started jumping in, researching at that time. What existed? Like, what sort of infrastructure existed? Like 18 years ago, Google's barely kind of new.
Yeah, so we would find information on YouTube, and there was there were blogs, and there was carseat.org, and there was all kinds of other places that you could find that information. But you're right, it was before the formation of the Child Passenger Safety Association of Canada. It was before I did this for work, and that's what got me interested and engaged, and I've never looked back. So I started helping parents and families in my community. I became trained as a child passenger safety technician. I worked as a volunteer, and then when my position came up, it turns out I was the most qualified for it at that time, and that was 10 years ago. Wow. That I've been in this role as my day job.
And how has that passion stuck with you? Because 10 years, your kids moved on sort of past the baby stage, but it seems like you're still so engaged and so passionate. What's kept you passionate about baby and baby safety and car seat safety?
That's a really good question. I think what's kept me passionate is that there's always new people. There's always new parents. There's always, children are born every minute. And so there's always this new generation of parents and caregivers and grandparents and, people who need this education, who need this support. Childhood, it's short. right? And so, people are moved on to, like, the people that I kind of grew up with my children have moved on into the next stage of figuring out how to keep their kids safe as teenagers and in other ways. But there's always these new caregivers and parents who need that education, who need that support, who haven't had that message. And also the other thing that keeps me going is there's the vulnerable families who may not be aware of this information, who might have language barriers or other barriers to access. And I also directly support the safe transportation of children with special healthcare needs that might affect their transportation as well at the hospital. So kids who can't sit up, kids who can't sit down, figuring out what kinds of car seats might exactly meet their needs. So, like, knowing what's on the market and knowing, like, okay, with this particular, what I think is going to help you is this particular car seat.
Okay. So you get to really be involved with individuals and help kind of like instill confidence and make sure that they feel safe and made the right decision for their families.
Absolutely.
I love that. Which, by the way, I don't know if you know this, that is the Snuggle Bugz mission. We live to instill confidence in parents navigating the early stages of childhood. So anytime we get to connect with people who are passionate about that, we're thrilled. So this is, I'm excited for this. I'm really excited for this.
Here for you. That's the Child Safety Links, tagline is like, we're here for you to help. Right? Like, you've got this, we're here to help.
Love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my first question for you is, I'd love to get a little bit of a history on what's changed in car seat world. Because you said a couple of really interesting things, like seats only went up to like 20 pounds and rear facing. And like, I often joke with the team, we have this term now we throw around, which is like convertible car seat. But really, every seat seems like it's convertible. So it's almost like a reference back to a different time. So can you give us just like a bit of a history, say in the last number of years, what's changed? And like how's it evolved from like throw a baby on the back seat and in a basket and hope that they make it home from the hospital to where we are today? You can skip some steps.
You can skip some steps in between. I mean, I think the things that have changed mostly over the last decade that, I've been the president of the Child Passenger Safety Association of Canada for a decade. And so I think that one of the things that have changed the most over that last decade is just people are more aware of child passenger safety. They're more aware of keeping children in the right stage, and we have some evidence of that too with the study that I know we're going to talk about in a little bit. But that the rear facing piece, right? We only had seats that were available. Like I said, the infant car seat, the rear facing only went to 22 pounds. The convertible car seats 18 years ago only went to 30 pounds. And so then one seat came out with a 35 rear facing weight limit, and it was a game changer, and everyone was talking about it. And we knew that, some research had come out in the US about, how much safer rear facing was. And, it kind of went from there, right? There was some high profile, cases where children had been injured, and people were releasing videos about how, the difference between rear facing and forward facing and, how that, what happens in a crash and what that looks like. And then all of a sudden, many car seat manufacturers had made seats to 40 pounds. Because at that time, there was no weight limit restriction for what Transport Canada decided to or could approve, rear facing or forward facing. Okay, there is a weight limit, but it extended far beyond what the limits manufacturers were making the seats to. And so, car seat manufacturers were meeting that demand from the public. And so you were seeing car seats that went to 40 pounds rear facing. And I mean, that was a game changer. And then many car seat companies manufactured car seats to meet that higher weight. And of course, they were tested according to the regulations. And so after that, we also now have, car seats that can take a child, forward facing to a much higher weight as well. And we only have car seats in Canada that can be approved with a harness up to 65 pounds. So that's kind of the max. But not kind of, it is the max. But more car seat companies recognize that parents and caregivers were looking to use a car seat with a 5-point harness for longer, right? If you're using a car seat rear facing to 40 pounds, you probably don't want to stop using a car seat with a harness at 40 pounds. And so they were coming up with higher weight limits of 50, 55 pounds and 65 pounds. So we're seeing more of those car seats as well. And one of the things we did find in the study was a delayed transition to booster seat, which was so nice to see that happen, right? Because you can't transition from a car seat with a harness to a booster seat that is lifting a child up, using an adult seatbelt, positioning it properly on their body. But that seatbelt is the star of the show there once you've moved to that booster seat. And so we don't want to see kids moving there before 40 pounds and before they're developmentally able to sit correctly, to have that seatbelt in the correct position on the entire ride. And so when we looked 12, 13 years ago, we saw that transition happened earlier than we would have liked to see. And now we're seeing that transition is happening later.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I have a question, because you laid out something really interesting there, which is like there's the safety standards, there's the manufacturer, and then there's the families and parents demand.
Yeah.
And it sounds
And
like...
in there is the provincial and territorial laws as well.
Yes, okay. So we've got the regulation of it all.
Yep.
What do you think moves first? Is the regulation ahead of consumer demand? And then does consumer demand drive manufacturers, or do manufacturers drive consumer demand?
I think it's a circle.
Okay.
I think it all kind of influences each other, right?
Mhm.
So, Transport Canada sets the regulations for how the car seats must perform,
Okay.
right, in a collision. So it's performance standards. There's not a lot of design requirements. There's a few.
Can I ask you a
But,
question
yeah.
about that?
Mhm.
So we get a lot of questions about the difference between Canadian and US standards,
Yeah.
and people wanting to maybe buy seats they see in the US, or seats in the US have certain features that ones in Canada don't have. Can you maybe talk about just a couple of the differences, or highlight even how they became different? Because
Right.
there's an understanding of, why isn't the standards the same, or why would it be considered safe here and not safe here? Just maybe highlight some of that for us.
Well, I mean, I think it's been very highlighted recently that we are our own country, right? That has our own safety standards and has our own regulatory body. And so Transport Canada sets those regulations for how a car seat must be labeled, how it must perform in a crash, the standards that it must meet before being sold to Canadian consumers, right?
Mhm.
What are our standards for safety? And so in some cases, they are slightly different than the current US standards, right?
Mhm.
So there are a few key differences. One being, for example, at this time we have a rebound standard. So for a rear-facing car seat, there's a certain, there's a motion where the car seat will move towards the point of impact, usually the front. In a test scenario, it's the front, and it will come back up. And then we have a standard, the dummy or the test subject,
Yeah.
the baby's head can't move past a certain line, right?
And that's a difference between the
so
two
that's,
countries.
That's a
Yeah.
rebound standard that we have in Canada that currently doesn't exist in the US at this time. And so sometimes you would see car seats that had, like a slightly different design when they were coming to Canada than they did in the US to meet this rebound standard. Another key difference is in Canada, the tether is required on all forward-facing seats in Canada, without question. In the US, that's something that each manufacturer can kind of set for themselves. It's not a testing requirement. And in Canada, the tether, we recognize how important that is. And so it was built into the regulations. And so all car seats will have to the instructions will have to state that the tether must always be used, making that a legal requirement, because the provinces and territories will say, you have to follow your manufacturer's instructions.
Right.
Right. And so we have that in Canada too. Those are the big two differences,
Right.
like at this moment. But of course, also we have labeling requirements in English and French for our francophone speaking population as well, which wouldn't be something you find on a US seat.
Is there anything surprising that is a small thing that's just like a micro difference between the two? Is there anything you'd say like, oh, actually tether width on Canadian seats has to be this, or is materials? Is there anything like that that's kind of just an interesting small difference?
There's a few things that you'll find on seats where there's just the slightest difference in, how long the webbing is, and also, and that if they made that change, it was because it either, didn't pass testing, or there was something about it that, the test bench was slightly different in Canada than it is in the US. There was something about it that they changed in order to meet those Canadian standards, or that it was easier to, right? And so you'll see slight differences on seats where you're like, the tether adjuster is a different mechanism. Why is that? And they were like, this one already met the standards, right? So we went with that. And you're like, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
So the major ones are the rebound specification, so how far it's allowed to
And that's
move.
a requirement. So like some of the seats that they have in the US may also meet that rebound requirement, right?
Right, but it's just that
it's not
there's a
something that they're testing. It's not something that they're required to do. And the requirement of always using a tether is another key difference at this moment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for that. So remember, when you're using a car seat, you've got to use the back tether. Non-negotiable in forward facing.
That's right. Absolutely.
Perfect.
And always follow the instructions for your seat, right? Because all of the seats are different, but that's always going to be there in all of them. And that's why it's important The other thing is we didn't really talk about like why is it important to use a car seat that does meet Canadian standards.
Yeah.
You know, that's where you're going to find your recall information from Transport Canada. So like if a car seat is recalled, you want to make sure that you've registered your seat and they're going to send you that, whatever the fix is to correct that in your seat. You want to make sure you're using a Canadian seat because it's the law, right? Like it is legally required to
Right.
use a seat that has that national safety mark
Yep.
in Canada. And yeah, it's hard to know. Like, are kids very safe in American seats and US seats? Yes, of course they are. But we do have these standards for a reason, and that's where you're going to hear about those things like those recalls. And you're going to be able to access the customer support that's designed for your country too.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I think it's a great segue into car seats in general. Maybe we can talk about why is car seat safety important, right? We've talked. Okay, so we've said, yeah, there's some ways the regulations are built. There's been all these changes over time. So, but at the core of it, why is car seat safety
why
so
do we
important?
care?
Why do we care? Yeah, why can't
absolutely.
we just put them in this seat forward facing, sitting straight up from day one, or a booster seat?
Or just sit them in the back seat, laying down.
Why can't I hold them, I'll put them driving and I hold the kid? Yeah.
So, you talk about like, never tell me the odds. Well, the risks, right? Like we know that of all of the things that our children do in the run of a day, driving in the car is probably the one that most caregivers are doing that has the most risk for a child. We know that in Canada, on average over the last, in a 10-year span, on average, 65 children were fatally injured every year between the ages of 0 and 14, right? To put that into context, sometimes you think like climbing a tree seems dangerous. 1 child every 10 years fatally injured from climbing a tree.
Wow.
65 children die every year.
Yeah.
0 to 14 on average, over a 10-year span from being transported in a car. And so we know that this is the number one reason that children are that die in injuries, in Canada, and it is staggering and sobering. But there's good news, and the good news is that we know that car seats and booster seats and seatbelts are effective when used correctly. Car seats save lives.
Yeah.
We also know that if the right car seat is used in the right way, the risk that a child will be fatally injured is reduced by up to 71%.
Sorry,
So,
say that stat just one more time.
So the right car seat used in the right way increases your rate of survival by as much as 71%, right? So
That's huge.
It works. Car seats work, right? And the key is to use them.
For context to the audience.
Yeah.
Smoking only increases your chance of all-cause mortality by 30%. That's how much of a difference 71% is. Like that is huge.
Yeah. It's absolutely huge. And so we know that car seats and booster seats save lives. We know that using the right, you are saving your child's life every day when you're buckling them in correctly. We were talking a little bit on the drive over about, some of the things that can increase those risks of misuse. And we were talking about how you can't choose the day that you're going to have a collision. Right? Like you do need to buckle them up correctly in the right seat, in the right way on every ride, just to make sure that your child is as protected as they can be, if today's the day.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's interesting you say that. We did a 14-hour car trip with a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Harrowing.
Yeah, harrowing. Yeah. Yep. But it's so interesting because I spent way more time thinking about like we're gonna be on the road a long time, making sure, double checking everything. But the reality is like, on a pop to the grocery store, you don't feel that same level of stress. Yeah. But most accidents happen close to the home. So
absolutely, of course they do, because that's where you are most of the time. Yeah. Right? Statistically speaking, I'm usually 5 minutes away from my house. Yeah. Right? And so most collisions do happen. And I don't have the exact number, but there is a number within 5-minute drive from your house. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I've had so many caregivers tell me, like, hey, I'm planning this big road trip. I want to make sure that my child is as safe as I can on and yes, absolutely, great time to do it. We want to make sure, but you're right. It's those little times. I'm just hopping to the grocery store. I've got an extra kid. Maybe I'll shuffle some car seats around and kind of see what I can do. All of those times.
You said something really interesting earlier, actually, when we weren't on camera, which is the number of times parents are getting in the car and buckling their little ones up has actually dramatically increased even from previous generations.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to mention?
Absolutely.
On that?
So if you look at there's a graph. I don't have it with me, but the graph goes like number of cars on the road, right? So we start here,
Yep.
number of cars on the
Okay.
road. Okay. It's here now, right? That's how many cars are on the road. Okay. The fatalities on the road used to be here, and now they're here. So it makes like this X of
Okay.
like the number of cars on the road is disproportionate to the number of fatalities on the road.
Right.
And that's, we've got this cross. Somewhere along the middle is where seatbelts were mandated and required in all vehicles.
Right.
And, and then, the legislation and like all of these little marks in innovation and education and enforcement and engineering, they've all, just had this dramatic decrease in fatalities, right? Number of cars on the road is a lot more than it was back in the olden days, right? But the fatalities have decreased because we have all of this technology and laws and infrastructure and engineering that are saving lives.
Well, I think you said it's almost like parents are doing an average of 6 buckle ups a day, whereas before it might have been 1, 2.
Right. I was saying
depending.
back in the day, in the 80s or 90s when I was coming up, like where did we go? We didn't go anywhere. We might have went to Brownies once a week, right? We went to the doctor. And now, driving a kiddo to daycare, picking them up from daycare, okay, gonna run to the grocery store. Maybe that's 6 bucklings a day on probably most days,
right?
Where a parent or caregiver is buckling a kiddo into a car seat.
Well, and you think too, how many parents now have 2 vehicles in the family and they're having to jump between the 2. So you have multiple instances of a car seat being installed now in 2 different vehicles, or maybe they're moving it between the vehicles.
Or maybe they're moving it between vehicles. Yeah. Maybe they're, taking their rear facing only seat and hopping into a taxi and buckling that up, or going with their mom today with their kiddo. So yeah, there's different cars, different car seats. Yeah. Lots of opportunities for misuse.
Now I think we need to discuss the study.
Right.
Can you let's tell the viewers a little bit about the study, what you were looking to do, how it all came together, and then what were the results? Because some of them, if I'm honest, were staggering.
Yeah. They're kind of shocking, they're eye-opening to look at for sure. But that's information that is so sorely needed. And so this study came about 2 or 3 years ago. I'd say 3 years ago at least now. Cybex had asked me. We were at the Cybex Summit, and Transport Canada had just presented on the previously most recent information that we had at a prior roadside study, and it was 10, 12 years old at that time. And they said, like, why is the data so old? I was like, in the world of data, that is not old data. But yeah, we don't know. Like, there's been a lot of changes and innovations in the last 10, 12 years, and we don't know how parents and caregivers are transporting their children now. And that, one thing led to another, and now we have, the preliminary results of this study. The study was conducted by Dalhousie University, so researchers at Dalhousie University. Shout out to Tanner Van Every, who is the master's. Shout out to Tanner, who is the master's student who did all of the mathing, made all the mathing math.
Yep.
In all of those parts.
We always appreciate the people who can make the math.
And Alexa Davis as well, who helped us get through the ethics approval and all of those things. And so we had Dalhousie University who conducted the study, and as a partner, Child Safety Link injury prevention program at IWK Health. So we had the hospital and injury prevention there. We also partnered with the Child Passenger Safety Association of Canada, who supported and sponsored the training for everybody to make sure that everyone had the knowledge and experience to be able to look in and say, do I know what's happening here and what to write down? And then, of course, Cybex as our funder and sponsor, Cybex Canada. They also provided all of the replacement car seats where we came upon a car that didn't have a car seat and maybe needed one to drive legally or safely, or had a car seat that they were unaware was the wrong kind of car seat or was damaged, broken, needed replacement.
Shout out Cybex. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Okay, so we that's some information how the study came together.
Yep. What did we look at?
What did we find? Because we had some 10-year-old data, right? Yep. And my assumption would be we talk about safety more. There's more information. There's more YouTube channels. There's more blogs. There's more Google searches. There's AI.
There is a lot of information out there. That is very true.
So you would think maybe things improved?
Right. So let's talk about how we can be sure that the study is a good one.
Yes.
Right. And so we weren't just looking at people who came to us on purpose, right? So you're a parent or caregiver, you're like, I need to make sure my car seat is safe as possible. You know that you've done your best because you want to make sure that you have that passing grade. You want someone to say, good job, you did it. But that's not who we were looking at. We were looking at busy you. Didn't sleep last night, the baby's crying. Now you've got to take the 6-year-old to soccer. You're putting them both in the car. It's raining. It was a little bit chaotic morning. And we've stopped you on the side of the road with the police partners. They have stopped you and brought you to this checkpoint, right? And so that's what we were looking at. We were looking at people on their way going about their daily lives. And it wasn't just a few people either. So we had an 89% of the people that we stopped agreed that we could document their information in our study. We did give them a $10 gift card to sweeten the deal a little bit. And even
shout out $10 gift cards. Right? Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure that they felt that they'd been compensated for their time and to incentivize participation in the study. But overall, we got nearly 700 vehicles that we were able to document, and over 1,000 children. Wow. So over 1,000 children between the ages of 0 and 14, we were able to observe and document how they were being transported.
How does that compare to earlier studies?
Right, and so when we look at all of the information that we were collecting, we stopped them. Sometimes it was 10 minutes we were hanging out with them, and sometimes it was longer. So we did not find any comparable studies out of the US that were both a roadside study and that went into that great of depth as well. We found roadside studies where they were kind of looking through binoculars to kind of see what they could see. And we found studies where they mostly were voluntary. People were coming there on purpose. So
slightly biased.
Yeah, well, there is that. And there's a bias anyway. Like we can see the police in the distance. Everybody buckle up, right? Like that could happen too. So there are some factors. But for the most part, we felt that this data was, very accurately represented the population that we would find, and how it compared to the prior study. The prior study was completed in this way as well, and we wanted to make sure the categories were similar so that we could kind of directly compare as much as you can, in a study that was completed 13 years prior that the data was collected. And so we wanted to make sure we used a very comparable methodology, but we had a more detailed form. So we did increase the level of detail of what we were capturing in the form. So not secured to the vehicle tight enough. Why, right? Were they making this mistake, this mistake, this mistake? Was it just too loose? Even everything else was done correctly. Like we wanted to make sure that all of those categories were captured so that we could dive deep, so we could figure out exactly what's happening here, compare kind of apples to apples. And there's no comparable study other than those two that have happened in Canada at all. Right? We've had some other binocular studies, and we've had some voluntary studies, some small studies, but we couldn't find anything that had been published, at least, that compared to what we were looking at.
Okay, so we've got 1,000 installs,
1,000 children,
1,000 children, and 700 vehicles.
Almost, yeah.
What'd you find? How did we do?
So we were looking at the overall number. We currently found that children who were using a rear-facing car seat, a forward-facing car seat, or a booster seat, or not using them, but they were present in the car or were attempting to do that, overall 81% had at least one misuse. One key misuse, I will say, like we talked about reading manuals, we were not reading manuals on the roadside. We weren't. We were looking at labels. We were using our experience and our knowledge, like the hands-on knowledge. I was present at every single event. Wow. But we also had a team. We had an experienced team at every single event, and we also had some community volunteers as well, right? But we know that, we were looking a little bit more closely perhaps than they were 13 years ago. We had a bit more experience, a bit more knowledge, and our form was more detailed. But at the same time, we found 81% had at least one misuse, one key misuse with their seat that we documented. So it was not low.
How does that compare to the original study?
Right. So if you compare that 81% in that rear-facing, forward-facing, and booster seat stage alone, not counting the kids in the seatbelt stage or in a seatbelt alone, and not counting the kids and including the kids who were, again, unrestrained in those stages, we had 81% in the study, and the prior number was 55% misuse. And largely that was because of booster seat misuse, actually. Really? So one of the reasons it was
I need to pause for a second, but that's huge.
It is huge.
With more information, more education, more everything, more communication, more seats, more options, more availability.
More options, more variety.
You're saying we went from 56 to 81.
Yeah, 55 to 81.
55 to 81.
Yeah, and that's including the booster seat stage, right?
Wow.
So when we are just looking at the harnessed car seat stage, the number, it's a little bit closer. It's like only within like a 10 or 11% difference between the two. But we found
Still.
a lot more
Yeah.
misuse in the booster stage than we had previously.
Like I would have thought
Yeah.
you would have said 81 were done correctly. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Not 81 incorrectly.
I
So-
know. Pull your car up and let's take a look. I'm just joking. Right? But
We already know I
here's the
overtyped.
other thing. Here's the other thing that you need to know, and that we needed to we recognize the entire time, is these were not parents and caregivers who were not, you know, who in some cases they were families who thought they were doing everything right.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at yesterday we talked about, like, look around the table. You know, if there's 10 people at the table, then 8 of you have at least one mistake that can be fixed, right? So this isn't talking about someone else is doing it wrong. This is talking about all of us need help and support. You know, this is judgment free. You know, everyone's doing the best they can with the resources that they have to get it right. Everybody loves their kids and is doing the best they can to keep them safe. But there are some errors, there are some mistakes, and parents and caregivers need help and support, you know, to read that manual and interpret it and know what that means for their child and their car. You know, videos from manufacturers help. You know, calling the manufacturer and finding that, like, expert help on the other end of the phone can help. And then, of course, finally finding that help from someone who is a child passenger safety technician. And so people can go, you know, all of the caregivers out there who are watching this, you know, we are 8 in 10, right? We are the folks who may need help and support to make sure that we're using our car seat or booster seat correctly. And so cpsac.org, cipsac.org /find a tech with hyphens in the middle. You go on cpsac.org, find a tech.
Sorry, we'll link it below.
Find someone in your area who has had that training, has that expertise. We talked about what is an expert. An expert's someone who knows how to help you look for the thing, right? I don't necessarily know exactly everything about your car seat, and I don't need to. I need to know enough that I know I don't know that. Enough that I know that we're going to look that up, right? Where does the crotch buckle go? In this hole, or this hole? You know what? I'm going to need to check that manual, right? I have checked 1,000. I've seen 1,000 children over the last 6 months, but I still need to look in that manual to see, okay, with this particular kiddo in this stage, where does that crotch buckle go in this seat? And so that's something that a trained CPST or technician is going to be able to help the parents and caregivers watching here today to make sure that they have asked the right questions, found that information, and telling them what information that they need to look for. Yeah.
So I want to go back just a little bit. Where were the biggest misuses? What were the biggest concerns that you saw? And where can we help people improve, especially as retailers? Like what are some areas we can, once we've identified those, like help improve?
Absolutely. So we categorized our misuse into 4 categories. So the first category was misuse in the stage. The kiddo is in the wrong stage of seat.
So they turn them forward facing too early. They have put them in a booster seat too early.
Or move them out of the booster seat too early.
Move out of the booster seat too early, okay.
Yeah, so the key error that we saw in that particular stage was moving them out of the stage before they were ready. Before they were, and we were really, like, when we were counting in our numbers, we were looking at, did they meet the requirements for that seat? And did they meet the law? Right? So the law in Nova Scotia is pretty comparable to the law here in Ontario and most of the laws across the country, but that's what we were looking at there. So did they meet that? And most of the errors were they've moved out of that stage too soon. So if we have a tip, make sure there is no rush. Keep your kiddo in each stage for as long as they still fit by that height, that weight, that fit limit. And finally, keep them in that booster seat for longer than you think too, because you know, the number one way that the car seats were misused were moving out of the booster seat too quickly. So up to 1/3 of the kids that we saw who were in a seatbelt alone would have been safer in a booster seat. So
that's crazy. 1/3.
1/3.
1/3.
Yeah.
Wow. So we need obviously to continue to educate. And
absolutely.
What were some of the other categories you saw?
Right. So the next category was, is the seat safe to use? And so, you know, is it expired? Is it broken? Is it missing parts? Is it, doesn't meet Canadian standards, right? So we've documented
This
all
is
of
always
those
the
things.
Facebook Marketplace concern, right? If you're buying a seat
Yeah.
secondhand, you don't always know what you're missing or not getting. Maybe you don't have the manual.
Yeah, that's true. And we were only
Yes.
looking at things we could tell, things we could see. So we couldn't see if a seat had been previously in a crash. We asked that question, but we couldn't see it. And we weren't diving deep. We weren't like physically looking up every seat for a recall either.
Right.
We were educating about it, but there was a few things that we weren't even looking at because we just didn't have the capacity to. But the number one misuse that we saw in that is your seat safe to use was a seat that was missing parts that were required for that mode.
Okay.
And so this is again where we had that knowledge. We know
Is
that
like
particular
pads on the belt that are maybe required for a specific side?
yeah,
or-
so it's something like that. There's cup holders that are required in rear facing mode on a seat. I asked a dad, I was like, he's got one cup holder. Do you know where the other one is? Like, why didn't we attach it? And he said, well, he's 10 months old. He's a baby. I don't know why he needs two cups. And I said, yeah, okay, fair, right? Like he was unaware that there are labels, there are stickers on that particular seat, but he was unaware that that cup holder was a part of the safety and security of the testing of his car seat in that mode. And so maybe there's screws that were required that are in a small bag that are now lost or missing. And they just weren't aware that that car seat has said, please don't use our car seat without these screws,
Okay.
right? Or it would have been padding that is required at a certain age, weight, or height. Or maybe, there's a seat that's rear facing that has a part that is now, it's in rear facing mode again. And you were saying about previously used on Marketplace. Well, maybe some of these seats were previously used by you, right? You had a child who's moved up through all of these stages and now you've misplaced this now required part is no longer with the seat. And so we're using it without, but we documented that. And the other kind of is your seat safe to use tip was expiry. So we did see the number one reason that a booster was the wrong or was an unsafe seat was that it had passed its expiry.
Okay.
We're seeing car seats and booster seats together that are that have a longer useful life. And so as we move forward, we may see less and less, fewer car seats that have expired while people are still using them.
Well, it's so interesting, especially the length you're using it. So if your kids are further apart and you're using the booster seat for a really long time now, you have to be aware of that as you're transitioning the next kids
or
up.
if you've moved your child into a booster seat too early and now you've been using it for many years, you don't want it to expire before they get out of it. So keep them in all of those stages for longer, including the booster seat stage. The next category was use. And so that was attaching the child to the car seat. And so the number one error and misuse that we saw there was that the harness was too loose. Okay, was too loose. So, we want to see a snug, tight harness. And for a booster seat, we saw the number one misuse was that it was routed incorrectly through the booster seat. So there's a belt path, maybe it's under the armrest, maybe it's tucked under like in a little pathway. Maybe there's a shoulder adjustment on like a high back booster. And so we saw that if it was misrouted, also the seatbelt fit in a different way and it led to seatbelt misuse when it was routed incorrectly. So tight and route them correctly, right, on a booster seat. And then finally, installation. And the number one misuse that we saw was just that we determined that they did not have a secure install, okay? And the number one reason that they didn't have a secure install was that it was not properly tightened. But in addition to that, for forward-facing, there was a much greater chance of being not a secure install with a forward-facing seat because we saw a misuse of the tether. A third of all forward-facing car seats that we saw, again, the tether is legally required for all car seats that are sold in Canada, require the tether for correct use, required by law, by the requirements of the seat. And a third of them were not using it at all. Not just misused, not using it. Had not used the tether. And so it's so important, it prevents that forward motion where a seat rotates down, it prevents that motion and it reduces how far forward a child's head will travel, the kind of momentum they get. And it can mean the difference between a serious head injury and hospitalization and no injury at all, right? It's that like just a few inches mean that your child's head might strike something in the vehicle interior versus having not struck anything and had no injury. So it's so important to attach the tether and use it correctly.
So we got some work to do as not only retailers, but as influencers out in the world, and there is some work to do to improve.
They say it takes a village, and we're a part of that village, right? So, this is federal regulations and provincial laws, those could also benefit, everyone in health and healthcare. I work in a children's hospital, family resource centers, people who are out there with the intent to help families be safe, retailers, the manufacturers, influencers, all of us, and then just parents, friends, caregivers, everybody who loves their children and their friends' children. It's and every child. It's all of our responsibility to get that message out there, to help whenever we can, to provide accurate information and resources to be able to do this correctly, because it's just so important. Our children are the most important things in our lives. And a serious injury or a fatal injury, it affects all of us, right? It affects the entire community. And so whatever we can do to reduce that, it's within our hands. We've got these resources and supports.
So why don't we wrap up on a couple things I'd love to just ask, which is, we've talked about the ways you can do it incorrectly.
Yeah.
When done correctly, what do we see?
What are we looking at?
Yeah, what are we looking at? Like, what is the impact? What's the, how much safer is a car seat when it's done correctly?
Right.
Like, maybe take us out with some of the good news of like what we can do to prevent some of these issues.
Absolutely. So the good news is that we know that a properly used car seat can reduce the risk of a child being fatally injured in a collision by up to 71%. Like, that's not nothing. We talked earlier about the fact that, I do work at a children's hospital. Sometimes I am discharging children whose families have been involved in a motor vehicle collision. And oftentimes, there will be maybe a child who was forward facing or in a booster seat, or even in a rear facing seat who's suffered an injury and is now going home. And so I'll ask, are there any other children being transported in this vehicle, to kind of figure out what we're going to do to safely discharge them home. And sometimes I find that there was a younger rear-facing sibling who, in this same collision, was uninjured and was not airlifted to our hospital. And oftentimes I'll find that there were, this is a serious enough collision where the parents are recovering at different hospitals, and they will, require surgeries and rehabilitation and a lot of involvement over the next few months. But here we have a kiddo who, through a car seat, with the support of a car seat, is now able to go home after just a few days of an inpatient stay, and had a younger sibling who didn't even arrive at hospital, right? Like, that's not the case for everyone, but it's common enough that I've seen that scenario several times over the last 10 years. We know that car seats save lives. We know that correctly used car seats, it's not just like saving a life as well, it's reducing that risk of how serious the injury is going to be. And so the good news is that car seats do their job, and if we help them do their job and we do it correctly, we can save our children's lives and the lives of our friends' children.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate this. I know our viewers and friends at home are going to appreciate this. So we can take a couple highlights. One. Read the docs. Read the manual. Read your vehicle manual when you're making a decision.
If there was one tip, it would be read your manual, read your vehicle manual, read your, and make sure that you do it correctly on every ride. Like, we don't get to pick the day that a collision may happen to us, that a deer might dart out in front of your vehicle, right? And so we want to make sure that your child is buckled on every ride. And if there was a second tip, it would be, when you don't know, when something is confusing, reach out for help. Reach out to your retailer, reach out to your manufacturer, who has that information, can accurately answer those questions that you have, and have trained staff who are experts, in their car seat. And then finally, of course, to reach out to a trained child passenger safety technician, cpsac.org, find a tech. Those folks are the trained folks to help you follow your manual. They're not making it up. They're helping you find that information that is there for your seat and to use it correctly on every ride.
Thank you so much. Quick thank you to Cybex for putting this together, for bringing Catherine out to us, for sponsoring the study. We are eternally grateful. This is fantastic information. This is going to help change how we approach content, and even understanding like how much we need to double down on some of the basics and really make sure that all of you feel confident and that you can make great decisions and feel safe with your little one. So thank you to Cybex. Thank you so much, Catherine. And if you've got any other questions about this, we have articles on our Learning Center on our website. We have videos all across our YouTube channel. Our social channels are filled with demos and discussions. We've got long form, short form content. We've got incredible product descriptions where we give you all this information. Anything you're looking for, we've got. So we hope that you can take a moment to check out everything, snugglebugz.ca, visit a store, do a dry fit, test your car seat in the car, and honestly, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Friends, thank you so much for joining us here today. I really hope you enjoyed that interview with Catherine. We gave out a lot of information, and I know it can feel overwhelming, but this is an important subject. Car seat safety is serious, and we wanted to treat it with this necessary serious to make sure you feel confident when you install your car seat. Now, if you have questions about specific car seats and specific installs, don't worry. We've got lots of videos showing you how to install and talking you through the specifics of a car seat. We've got Learning Center articles, we've got reviews and videos, so there's endless resources for you to see individual car seats. But if you're looking at install tips for the various stages, be on the lookout, because next week we're going to be launching additional videos where we actually sit with Catherine and talk through the different types, where we give you the top tips for every single style of car seat. It's really important and critical information. You're going to want to check it out. So be on the lookout. And as always, thank you so much for joining us here today. We're thrilled to have you. Maybe throw like a like, comment, subscribe down in that'd be great. And otherwise, have an amazing day. We'll talk to you soon.